Hey, Wild Goose. Thank you all for being here. I bump in every now and then just because I want to get to do something that's personal for me. Just curiously, how many of you all know Doug Padgett? Do you all know who I'm talking about? A tall guy with a weird hat. So I was in Nashville one night on a Tuesday night, and I don't know if anybody noticed, but I'm prone to dancing. And I was at a honky tonk, and I looked up, and there was a tall guy with a really weird hat. And I said, that looks like, but this is Nashville, not Minneapolis. It couldn't be Doug Padgett. And he turns and looks at me, and I look at him and says, oh my God, it's Doug. And beside him was Stan Mitchell. And I never met Stan at the time.
I was in a bar.
He was in a bar.
I don't remember.
And since that time, maybe in so many ways, one of my closest personal friends is Stan Mitchell. I've served I've been a member of his church, was involved in the leadership of the work at GracePointe a little while. I think Stan is one of the people that's inventing how faith forms for the future. And I'm just really glad that he's here. And some of you all have probably heard this statement that Stan has this amazing ability to articulate. He says, if you claim to be someone's ally, but aren't getting hit by the stones thrown at them, you aren't standing close enough. Yeah, and so I just wanted to say that and tell you I love you and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. And Jeff is one of my two or three, along with Ray Waters, best friends in the world. So it's amazing what you guys do. Thank you, Jeff. Well, what I do, for those that don't know, most of you are friends and a lot of you know, I fell into what I do after I moved from lead pastor to pastor emeritus at GracePointe. I was one more cishet, white, evangelical, multi-privileged humans, Christians, in this space that was having to wrestle with what I did with privilege and having to wrestle with, to what extent privilege is ill-gotten, to what extent it needs to be summarily rejected, can it be stewarded? And I finally landed on a space that I was comfortable with and I'm still comfortable with, and that is the best way that I could steward my privilege was to defer my platform as much as I could to people whose voices needed to be heard. All of us know that very cliched, but I'm sure well-intended and maybe meaningful in some ways, that old phrase, that koan, that some people are called to be a voice for the voiceless. I knew pretty quickly as I was privileged to begin pastoring a lot of LGBTQ people after our church did full inclusion, I realized pretty quickly that I was not a voice for the voiceless. That these were people who had incredible voices, loud voices, strong voices, articulate voices, meaningful voices. And as well-intended as it might have been, this idea that I am a voice for the voiceless is a very patronizing, self-congratulating, savioristic approach to this work that we do. And I realized that people like Mike, and I'll introduce you to Mike in a minute because this is his time, people like Mike have these incredible voices, but I knew, though I wasn't supposed to be a voice for them, I knew I did have a lot of privilege. And and Ray and I had a conversation about this years ago, we both said our privilege is not that we have a voice and you don't. Our privilege is that we have an amplification system. I had a platform and a microphone. That was it. I had a platform with an amplification system. That's not a voice, it's an opportunity for a voice. And I realized that I had breathed a lot of air into that microphone for a long time. Even this week, I'm not a humble person, but I do try to be decently reasonable. And even this week, Jeff is one of my best friends and a member of our church. And the last couple of years when Jeff has called and said, what do you want to do this year at the Goose? I said, I would really like to introduce people. And Because I do think for cishet guys like me, there has to be some sense, apologies to the Supreme Court, there has to be some sense of committed, intentional, affirmative action. I think one of the best things we can do, and it doesn't hurt the mission, it helps it, is get out of the way. Because we've had our time. We have said a lot of things, and we've done good work. But I think we have to put our money where our mouth is, because not only do these people have voices, they also have skills and capacities, leadership capacities that are beyond ours. And I keep getting that over and over and over again, reinforced and even renewed and even made new. The last session, 2 of us, Ray and I, stood up here and talked about wine and wineskins. And the entire thing started out of a conversation we've been in for 4 or 5 years. Okay, we've got the wine. How do we develop new wineskins? And that whole thing was supposed to be this open, humble thing of saying, we don't know what the wineskins are, but we've got to find them. And then queer voices and women's voices and youth voices began saying, what if the wineskins are already here and your responsibility is not to come up with them, but to recognize them and defer to them? And I left the session like I thought I had that nailed. And I didn't even have the question right. What if, and that's why I ended with the greatest thing Jesus ever said. You know how we say the Great Commission is go into all the world and baptize? That's a good commission. What if the Great Commission is what he said to Mary? Let me go. How about that for a leader? How about that for a impactful leader who looks at his followers and says, the best thing you can do now is let me go and you go become the body of Christ. For 2,000 years, we have kept trying to worship this guy. There's something about the human psyche that loves to worship and be worshiped. And he looks at Mary and says, she wraps her arms around him out of the grave and says, I'll tell you, I'm not letting you go again. And he says, actually, that's exactly what you need to do. What a great leader. And then he takes them out and he floats through the sky. And they think, well, one more miracle. And they start worshiping. And the angel says, what are you doing? And they said, well, we're worshiping this great guy that can float through the sky. And they're like, well, he's actually going away so you can become you. Quit worshiping him and go to Jerusalem and become the body of Christ. And so that's what I found. I found, and I didn't even mean to, on social media. I spent the first year on social media trying to hone my best messages and condense them down to a few words and make an impact there and have people respond, and it did okay. And then one day I told a queer kid's story and it blew up. And I told another queer kid's story and it blew up. And all of a sudden people started reaching out to me saying, I don't have a pastor, I'm a 19-year-old kid, Assembly of God, North Dakota, and I can't go back to my church, it's killing me. And I started just offering pastoral care for a diaspora of queer people who couldn't go back to their Baptist church and little communities that don't have a GracePointe. And then they would come to me and I would tell their story and more people would reach out. So that's been the fabulous thing for me. I haven't had to forfeit any of the privilege, but to be able to steward it and turn it over to voices that actually are not voiceless, but are really more articulate than mine, has been a very meaningful thing. And whatever wound that was to my ego was quickly healed by it saved me in so many ways in my life and just saved me as a human being. So to that end, just doing that, 2 years ago, I get another one of those innocuous calls, and this young man that I don't know from Northern California reaches out. Talk about privilege and the absence of it. This young man who's working in a large evangelical church, a prominent church, a really influential church, reaches out to me, and y'all forgive me. Having him here just kind of reminds me that, oh man, maybe my life's not wasted. But he reached out and he said, if I flew to Nashville, could you spend an hour with me? And there was no false humility on his part. He meant that. sitting at the table, chowing down on the Eucharist, and periodically being interrupted by Syrophoenicians beneath the table saying, could we have just one morsel of those wine-stained crumbs that fall from the corners of your mouth? And I said, well, you could, if you came, you would fly to meet with me? And he says, I've got to talk to somebody, and I saw and I thought you would be safe. And I said, I would spend as much time as you want. And this young man flew, and, you know, at first I'm like, well, maybe he's a creeper or something. I don't know. You're just cynical about all that. And it turned out to be the opposite of a creeper. It turned out to be one more person that I just continue to be privileged to serve. It was Mike, and he came and he sat down and he opened his heart. And the last 2 years, I mean, I spent the first 6 months with him, helping him with his own, just listening, his own internalized homophobia, trying to make peace with himself. And now the last year, I've watched him just become this profound influencer. And I say influencer, tongue-in-cheek a little bit, but is lots more influence even in a lot of ways than I do now, and his voice has become so profound. So I'm happy to be in this role now of saying I must decrease, you must increase, and one of the ones that needs to increase, Colby, I think you could say exactly what I just said, is Mike Maeshiro. So that's my side of our story. Don't mess it up.
Nice. Thanks, Stan. I haven't said a word yet. I'm already crying. This is crazy. Thank you for being here. Yes, thanks for having me. Yeah, I remember reaching out to Stan. I had to hunt Stan down. I'm like, where is this brilliant person? Why is there not a website and an altar built to this genius, you know? So yeah, I was at a church in Redding, California that was very influential in the charismatic stream, and I'd been there for 12 and a half years, and I was an itinerant minister and a speaker, and I taught at the ministry school there, and I was somebody in that environment, and all of the things I built were based on the lie that I was a straight man. As long as I was straight acting and I pretended to be straight, then I could do all the things. But the moment I was honest about who I was, I knew I would lose all of it, and that's exactly what happened. But I was 18 when I had a radical experience with who I understand God to be for the first time, and I didn't know that you could experience God like that, and it wrecked me, and then 8 months later it happened again, and I heard expressly in that exchange that God wanted me to be gay, and I knew that God wasn't allowed to say that to me, that the church would not accept that it was unbiblical. I knew all of the things, right? But I also was very aware that this was happening. So I harbored that secret for 14 years and just continued to excel in ministry, and my platform just kept growing, and I kept being more visible and having more influence, and I had my hands in more things. And so the demand to keep that to myself just kept getting heavier and bigger. But I had 8 more experiences like that over that next 14 years until eventually at the beginning of 2020, another experience happened that was the straw that broke the camel's back, and I couldn't keep doing it anymore. I couldn't keep being platformed by an institution and an organization and a system that was harming and dehumanizing people like me. And the reason I was getting away with it was because I was lying. And underneath all of it, it was a deep need to be aligned with who I know God to be, what I know love to be, what I understand about truth and integrity and honesty. So I had a fateful experience in the woods and bawled my eyes out because I knew the moment I made that choice in my heart, the things I was doing that I loved doing would not happen again. So sitting on this stool with you is I did not see this in that moment, you know? All I could see was everything I was gonna lose. And it was keep all the privilege and the benefits and being a pampered person in Egypt, or admit that I'm a Hebrew, you know, analogy-wise, and stand up for my brothers and sisters and embrace my own humanity. And so I chose me finally after years of not doing that. And then everything played out exactly like I thought. Thankfully, I had people Stan in my corner who were helping me anticipate how bad it was going to be, because I thought people were going to listen. I thought they'd be sympathetic, and they would know, they knew me, right? I'd been in ministry with them for years. Of course, they would at least listen. I thought that, and Stan's that's not gonna happen. I'm what? And I'm like, Stan, you don't know. Like, he's like, all right. And then, yeah, it went out. It went exactly the way he told me it was going to go. It was really painful and awkward, and I started recognizing how unacceptable the lack of listening had been the entire time. Like, the leaders I'd been working under did not have a faculty of listening in our relationship. That did not happen. And so once I realized that this was a closed door to the authentic me, I was like, okay, I got to leave. I can't go on this journey of, like, humanizing myself and coming out of the closet and fight off all of this opposition and gaslighting and cognitive dissonance at the same time. So I was like reaching out to Stan, like, can we talk? And then we met, and I was like, can I move here? I was like, I know that's creepy. Maybe that's where the creeper thing might come from, but like, I need something else. I can't be where I am. I need someone, you know. And he's like, sure, we can meet, you know, it's fine. So I came back to my hometown, was like, hey, I gotta go. I can't stay here. I gotta leave, you know? And then some of my very close friends came with me on that journey. We moved across the country together and went on this journey of learning how to advocate for and understand the queer experience. And I was like a living test subject in that process, like a necessary one, because there's so much nuance, right? We were reading books and listening to speakers, but there's so much element to the human component of this that wasn't represented in a lot of that I got to like represent. Like, hey, when you said that, hey, when this is happening, like, this hurts, this is painful. And so we got to fight through that and cry and misunderstand each other, but got to a place where everybody in that space was an ally. I didn't have any allies when I came out, so it was like a journey, right? So people like Stan were a godsend, like water in the desert. I did not know there were so many people out here doing this work. So anyway, that happened, and then I decided to take the platform that I did have and come out. And I'm like, I'm gay! And they're like, oh God, this is horrible. This is the worst thing you could have done. Why are you doing this to us? And I'm like, what? So then there was a lot of fallout and cost, and I think for the last year and a half, I've just been going hard at like creating content for people like me 5, 10, 15 years ago, queer kids especially, being raised in an inhospitable environment, specifically the evangelical church, like being raised by people who are supposed to teach you what love is, what trust and safety and protection is, and they're actually the people you're unsafe with. When I came out at 10, my first thought should have been, I want to tell mom and dad. Oh, sorry, when I realized I was gay at 10, my first thought should have been, Mom and Dad, I'm gay. And my first thought was, I could never tell them. And like, that's really sad to think about, like a 10-year-old at home being unsafe because they discover who they are. Like, that's not how the journey of self-discovery is supposed to go. So I just started creating a lot of language and visibility for people like me to at least push against the pervasive, incessant language that queer people are subhuman, are abominations, are not acceptable, or whatever. And it's been a wild ride.
So a few weeks ago, Mike actually, on our Pride weekend at during Pride Month at GracePointe, I wasn't there. I don't get to be there often, but Mike was there on a Sunday, and I received like 5 phone calls from dear people, like longtime GracePointers. GracePointe's having our 20th anniversary in August, and which is a lovely thing. Wow. But 4 or 5, including Josh, the lead pastor, called, and old timers that have been there from the beginning called, and they kept saying, independent of one another, that was the single greatest service we have ever had at GracePointe. And I was like, you mean since I left? You're talking about recent history, right? like AD, BC, like, but they said it was the most profound service that we've had. So again, just kudos to the voice. What's the, before we get out of here, I do want you to let people know as much as you can how to find you, because the things you say, I've had tons of people say here, I like not only what he's saying, but the tone with which he's saying it. It's amazing to me. I mean, you're already tens of thousands, approaching 100,000 followers, so I want people to be able to find you there. What's been the hardest part so far? Parents?
Probably. Yeah. Parents. My parents are the only people in my whole family who are not affirming. They're the religious, Trump, conservative evangelicals in our family. So this has been a really painful rift in our relationship. I was the the guy who went to ministry school and was a pastor and was speaking, and they were so proud of me, and then I'm gay, and now I'm like the person they are the most ashamed of, and like, please don't say this publicly or whatever. And so it's weird because like I love my parents and I know they love me. That's true. They love me to the degree they know how or whatever, and I keep trying to find language to explain the phenomenon that is what I'm experiencing with them, but like in a lot of ways their behavior and attitude is forcing me to choose between our connection and my own validity as a human being, which that's actually not a negotiation at this point. So I'm currently in a painful period of like, what do I do with these people who love me to whatever degree they're able to, that comes with a lot of gray area, and who also subscribe to really toxic ideas that dehumanize me, that harm me and people like me, and lots of other people too. I don't have an answer for that right now. I talked to Stan probably mostly about that at this point. Like, this is really hard. I don't want to get bitter. I don't want to be angsty, and I don't want to just cut these people out of my life. But I also don't want to co-conspire in my own diminishment, right, and enable harmful treatment. So yeah, that's probably the hardest.
This week, the behind the scenes is this week. So this guy has great influence. He's doing a lot of wonderful work, and he called and said, I'd love to sit down and or I told him I want to catch up. We spent 2 hours together, and an hour of it was crying about parents, you and me both, telling stories, I mean, on the front side, people see my Facebook page and they watch my post about my mom, and it's lovely and it's good and she's beautiful and she's taking this painful dementia journey, and I get to be with her, and there's so much loveliness in it. One of the loveliest parts is somewhere in the process of dementia, my mom's homophobia went away, and I can do my work with her in the car, and she's telling queer kids on Zoom calls, you're fine, everything's great. It's like somehow dementia relieved not only short-term memory, but it took that away, and I didn't expect that. But sitting there talking with you, and no matter how much good you do, there's still this grief there. And so I got the mom stuff on one side. The underbelly of that is my father, who I know loves me, explaining to me a few months ago, or maybe a year ago, that he really felt like dementia was God's gift to my mom so she wouldn't have to see what I'm doing. And he meant that he didn't curse me, and he believes that to the bottom of his heart. Well, I will never feel what you guys feel, but if you claim to be an ally to a group of people, and you're not getting hit at least approximately by some of the stones thrown at them, which I know mine's just shrapnel from the bombs that land in you guys' heart. But so we just sat and we cried, and we didn't walk away with any resolve, except it's not easy. But how much does that necessarily, necessarily is the wrong word, but almost how much necessarily does that sensitize you and make you, I mean, you want to be, this is the wounded healer thing, and yet you don't want to bleed all over people either. So navigating your own stuff with your parents, that's 80% of the people that you're working with now, right? Yeah. How much does it help?
Yeah. Well, I guess, I used to be so, one-lining and dropping, great advice and wisdom and revelation for people. And one of the scariest things about coming out publicly as a gay person is I don't get to just give pithy statements anymore. I get to be something, be someone, and I get to offer my life and my experience and my story, which is so much more vulnerable. And that was terrifying. But I found now at this point, especially with the queer people who reach out to me, I think one of the most powerful things that I do in my work is simply express the pain, the honest, pushing the envelope of what's socially appropriate to share, pain of what it's like to be in this position, to be in these tensions, have these kinds of people in your life, have these kinds of things said to you on a regular basis. Expressing the experience of that in language, I think has been one of the most helpful things in terms of getting feedback, what people are resonating with. And I think my work has found the most impact in giving queer kids, especially who have been harmed by a religion, permission and tools and language, but mostly gumption to have the audacity to love themselves like they've deserved this whole time, and find the language and the tools and the resolve to make the choices to choose themselves, even if it costs them other things. Yeah.
Hey, Josh, come. I know you don't want to do extra work. Come down. Come down. This is our new lead pastor, the guy that has begrudgingly done a better job than I used to do. But anyway, yeah. But anyway, you guys had the best service with him. Tell everybody about that service, and then would you maybe lead some questions for Mike? This is a guy that's been a successful, great evangelical minister, taking his own journey and is now doing good work on the other side. I'm sure there will be some people that have some questions. What happened at GracePointe the other day when I didn't get to be there? Why was it the greatest service besides those that I used to be in?
Well, I mean, that's relative to, if you'd been there, it would have been even better. So we had our Pride service on the 25th of June, and it's one of those things, like, if you try to tell somebody, like, you taste something that's so amazing, it's like the best thing you've ever tasted, and then you're like, what'd it taste like? Spaghetti. You know what I mean? Like, you can't really, but it was sort of this beautiful celebration of the divine within queerness, right? It was a celebration of Mike and Mike's story. It was a celebration of our friend Wynn, who got up and told the story of him reclaiming himself and reclaiming the little boy who he tried to silence and push away. It was seeing our friend Derek's video, For Girls Will Be Boys. And it was just this, it was just gorgeous. It was just gorgeous. And I came up late, so I'm afraid I'm going to ask for repeat questions.
If you repeat it, I'll just tell you we did that one already.
Okay. Well, that'll hurt my feelings.
Oh.
No, I'm kidding.
Then I'll answer it again.
So, I mean, Mike, when you and I started getting to know one another, you were not only deconstructing your sexuality, you were deconstructing your faith. And we met when you were in a pretty vulnerable spot. I didn't have all the information. I thought I scared you off forever. And you came back. We became friends. And I just wonder if you could share with people, as you've been processing your own journey. You were just talking with Stan about some of the hurts. I have known you in so many ways as a person of just like joy. So as you've come into yourself, the fullness of who you are, there have been so many losses. What are the joys? What are the gains? And what has it taught you about who you are as a human being?
Wow, yeah, that question has not been asked. This is funny, but when I came out and like got to be on the other side of that terrifying experience, for the first time in my life, I had possibility in my love life. For the first time, I could actually consider dating someone I was actually attracted to, and I could envision the possibility of something down the road, and I could, like, that was crazy for me. Like, I had never been, yeah, so that was, I mean, it's so weird to have to say that. I'm 36 now, right? But I was like 33 when that was like, wait a minute, I could be happy. Like, that was a possibility for the first time in that area of my life. So when straight, bigoted people tell me, can you please not make your sexuality your whole identity, or, there's more to life than sex or whatever, I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, we're not even having the same conversation. You have no idea what it's like to not have that as a possibility your whole life, right? So, and I was a really good Christian, so I really repressed myself.
And what you just described is holy.
Right. It was respected, yeah.
You coming to understand, I could be happy, I could have love, I could have an experience with another human being. That's holy.
Yeah.
And it's not like, oh, well, I get to do this, but it's less than, it's not the same. No. It is holy, it is sacred, it is good.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and this is like another probably deeper one, but like the reason I came out was because of what I was experiencing in the intimacy I understand with God, right? God was affirming me as a gay person, and God continued to defend my queer identity. God was my first ally, and I didn't want to align with that because of everything it was going to cost me. But like I remember I started coming out to people, but I was still like apologetic. My tail was still between my legs. My head was still low. I was still like ashamed and embarrassed and like cringing for the straight people I was making uncomfortable by telling them the truth about who I was. And then I had a realization like a few months after that where like God didn't trick me. God wasn't doing this to me. This wasn't happening to me. This is something that like was actually beautiful and holy, and I was disparaging of it, and I was distancing myself from it, and I was still practicing this internalized homophobia that I was trying to fight against outside of myself. So once I realized that, there was a moment that changed for me, and I was like, I will no longer ever allow someone in my presence to make a homophobic comment. I will not apologize for being who I am, for being the way I am in the world, and I will not let them treat people like me like that again. Thank you. And that was a turning point for me, and it wasn't because I was angry or I wanted to fight. It was because I realized I was actually falling short in the accountability I had in love to who I know God to be in my life. I was falling short on that intimacy, and I was like, the divine in me deserves better than this. How I am showing up is subpar, and that is not acceptable, and I know better. So it was a social cost, but yeah.
I'm just like, I just got saved. What you said two things there. One was that God was your first ally, and I don't know anything. I know a lot of things about some of you. I don't know everything about everybody, but that's true for all of you, and true for all of us. Yeah. Before you knew how to care and be your own ally, God, the divine, was your ally advocating for you. But you mentioned, it reminded me of the quote from Irenaeus that the glory of God is a human being fully alive. You know, all my life, and I bet you did too, because even though you all were a little more happy-clappy than we were still pretty centered on the Bible. That scripture from Romans, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Right? That text. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Well, the glory of God is a human being fully alive. Your journey has been a journey of coming back and realizing the glory of God is you being exactly who God made you to be. Mm-hmm. And the fact that our evangelical conservative siblings can't see that is significantly their loss. Mm. And it's the loss for all the queer people they're shutting out and ignoring.
Totally. That's true. I know I feel a weird sense of sadness and almost pity for my parents for their inability to see me and witness this part of my life and show any level of curiosity or interest in the things that are like some of the most central to my work today. I'm like, I feel sorry for you guys. Like, I'm your son, and you have no idea what I'm experiencing, what I care about, what I'm invested in. Like, this is your loss. If I had kids and I was missing out on that, I would feel so bummed as a parent. And so I'm just like, and I don't know how to help, but yeah, it's like, this is like a glorious unfolding and like metamorphosis. It's beautiful, and my parents want nothing to do with it. It's such a weird contrast, but yeah.
Would you say that in the process of fully coming home to yourself, that you actually, and I know the answer to this, I'm just teeing you up, you actually feel, to use the language we grew up with, closer to the divine?
Yeah, this is the most aligned I've ever felt with God.
So people are telling, the message you were getting is, if you want to be aligned with God, you have to be misaligned with yourself.
Right.
And what you found is quite the opposite.
Literally the opposite, yeah. I mean, we're talking about me being gay, but this applies to all kinds of aspects of humanity. There are things about what it means to be human right now we're not talking about that are stigmatized and ashamed and we don't present. And God in us is the thing, the person pushing that out, maintaining that expression, energizing the inspiration for that to come forward. So me being gay was just a very loud, focused, pronounced, culturally controversial aspect of my humanity, but that's true for all of what makes us who we are. It's rooted in the divine, in my opinion, and in my experience. Like, whoever we think we are is, at the core of that, is the essence of God. And for us to deny or hide or manipulate or diminish that for someone else's comfort or approval is sacrilegious.
Woo, that'll preach. Yeah, you should clap for that. That'll preach. So let me ask you the question. I get this question a lot. I'm sure Stan gets this question a lot, and I know you do too. Are you still a Christian?
Oh my God. I've been asked that more this weekend than in a while. I do. I still identify as a Christian for a couple of reasons. Actually, you were a big part of me coming to that conclusion. Josh, I was talking to Josh about, Josh, I don't believe this anymore. I don't believe this. Is it ethical for me to still claim to be a Christian? And one of his pushbacks was like, Mike, first of all, no one gets to define what Christianity means for you. There's not some deciding body that gets to govern or legislate what it means to be Christian in the world. And I was like, okay, thank you, helpful. And he was like, and by the way, if we just walk away from the whole thing, if those of us who are taking this seriously and responsibly looking at this and being humble enough to change our minds and do the work, if we walk away from the institution of the church and the conversation, then we leave Christianity to the worst of what we've seen thus far, and those people get to be what represent and dictate and perpetuate and evangelize what they come up with. And I don't want to leave that to the bullies and the people who dehumanize people and marginalize us. But then underneath that as well, there are so many queer kids who are Christian, and they are more Christian than they think they're gay in their minds. And I would like to be somebody that shows up in their algorithm. I would like to be somebody who speaks their language, who identifies with their experience, who they can recognize, I was in that same position, I was in that same world, I had those same problems, I had those same people, that same worldview, and yet I'm saying this, right? And so the Christian label in the public space, I'm still maintaining because I want to help those queer kids who don't even know they're gay yet, and their parents will disown them, will push them to the side, will be the reason they consider not wanting to be here anymore. I want to reach those kids and punch a hole through that oppression and abuse and say, those aren't your only options. You don't have to be Christian or dead. You can be yourself and still have faith and follow God. And, yeah.
I want to slightly nuance the question now.
Okay.
Because these two aren't necessarily the same thing. How do you feel about Jesus? Christianity's a label you wear.
Yeah.
How do you feel about Jesus?
I am a big fan of Jesus. I had to renegotiate my relationship with Jesus because of my deconstruction and the research and studying and having friends like Josh. I had to face some really difficult things about who Jesus had been told to me and why and all the things. And so now Jesus is this profound, beautiful advocate for, I think, what we've been talking about, Christ in humanity, joining and reconciling this supposed contradiction and saying actually something beautiful and profound is happening. These living epistles are us, and the words of Jesus still speak to the conditions we find ourselves in now. And I mean, Josh's book has actually pulled Jesus more central to my process than Jesus has been for probably about a year now, on just evaluating what do we think is normal and what is acceptable and what is appropriate and what are we still actively participating in and supporting in the world, especially economically and politically. Oh God. And so Jesus is there's a whole new lens to how I hear the words and parables of Jesus, thanks especially to the work you're doing. I don't worship Jesus anymore, which is...
He's probably would be grateful.
Right? And that was actually really sobering and kind of tragic to realize the Jesus I've been regaling and waving around my whole life never wanted that. And it's I was conditioned and culturized to dehumanize Jesus in that way. And now I feel I'm actually finally honoring the person of Jesus by removing the Santa Claus savior complex demand that we've placed on this figure to erase our accountability and ownership and responsibility for how we're showing up in the world. So that has changed quite a bit.
Sorry. Oh. Well, have you all talked about the flack you get on the internet?
No.
You want to?
Sure.
Mike, I hear there are people on the internet who are very unhappy with you.
That is true.
How do you process that? It's one of the, and I hate using cliches, but sometimes they're cliches for a reason. How do you keep it's not the water outside the ship, it's the water inside the ship. How do you keep the water from getting inside? Because I know people say we've been on enough videos together that I see. How do you stay okay?
Yeah, I mean, I had never been accused of being demon-possessed or worshiping Satan or being a false prophet or a false teacher or leading people to hell or being a child molester or worse than a rapist or a murderer. I'd never been told any of those things until I came out. And then all of a sudden that was like a regular message in my world. Like I'm reading these words about me on a regular basis. And there was a period of time where that was really difficult and my mental health suffered and I needed to figure out how to have a boundary with social media and people's voices. It was crazy. Now, when I start seeing the hate comments, I get excited because the haters are actually going to drive my content to more people. And so I'm like, sweet, keep going. What else do you hate about what I said? What else? Keep going. Tag people. What else do they want to hate? It's helpful because then more people see it. So on a marketing or social media standpoint, like I embrace it now. I'm like, yay, this is going to pop. But in terms of like how it's affected me personally, the big reason why I want to like showcase this abhorrent behavior and these terrible words people say is I want them to know, we got 5 minutes. I want the queer kids watching who are silently not liking, not sharing, not commenting, but watching, right? They'll type in my name and come see what is going on that day because they don't want anyone to know that they have anything to do with my account. I want them to see someone like me take this horrific treatment and realize like it's not the end. Like, you actually can get past this. You shouldn't have to. But there are people like me in the world who can take this, and we're going to show you what it looks like to turn feces into a beautiful garden, right? And to like compost with that stuff. And for me, having close people in my life who love me and who I've been able to work out in our relationships, like I'm seen, I'm held, I'm known, I'm loved here, has been a game changer. And thankfully, I have important people in my life who have been incredible allies and supporters. So as I continue to just stay present and current with myself and honest about how this stuff is affecting me, I'm finding less and less that any of this hits on a personal level, because I think there's like basically 13 things that anti-queer religious bigots say, just in different ways. It's the same 13 things over and over and over again. There's no imagination, there's no creativity, there's nothing new. It's actually kind of boring at this point. And so like, don't even take it personally anymore, because it just, all I hear now is, I'm ignorant, I'm uneducated, I'm uncomfortable, I'm terrified. That's all I see now when they call me a devil worshiper and a pervert and whatever. I'm like, oh, this person is so unhappy and so uncomfortable and so afraid. Bummer for them. This is a really inappropriate and irresponsible way to manage your own drama, right? That's all it's become at this point. So, but that came out of practice. Like I needed to get to like throw down and whatever. But so it's become that, and then I've now showcased it quite a bit because I want the kids watching to see that you actually will grow past this and find ways to evolve as a human being, and that this actually doesn't affect you anymore. And I think the biggest thing that I'll end with is I had to learn how to choose me, stand up for me, advocate for me, first and foremost, no matter who else and whatever else I was gonna lose. I could no longer make me second priority in my relationships, in my conversations, in my values, because I'd been doing it my whole life. We call that the closet, and it's poisonous and deadly. And so when I finally crossed that line and I decided somewhere in my soul on a subconscious level that I won't do that anymore, now this stuff doesn't get in. Now the conflict gets to be outside all the time. And that's a way better way to live.
So we're running out.
Yeah.
I know we're not going to have time for questions. I just want to ask you one more, because you said something at GracePointe on Pride Sunday that I think just made my jaw drop. And you talked about how you're learning to care about the transformation of those very people. Can you just talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, so the baseline of this is what I've experienced from God a few times in my life. Any of those experiences were drowning in what I would describe as pure, humble, kind, innocent, divine love. I'm convinced that this divine love is the word I find to be helpful at this point, exists objectively outside and within all of us. I believe in that person. I believe in that energy. Whatever verbiage works for you, like use it. I've experienced and been changed by this presence of powerful, transformative love. It's not just redeeming. It's not just healing or comforting. It's transformative. Like it changes us. I've seen how much it's changed me. And you would ask me like, what gives me hope? And I think that's part of where this comes from. Like these people who are purging their unwanted, unprocessed trauma and pain and fear onto people like me, the love that I've experienced and that has compelled me to go on this journey is also advocating for them, is also an ally to their humanity and their pain and their suffering. And so I think there's nuance to who should be addressing this and whose responsibility and role and whatever, right? And like some queer people should not be engaging in that because, but this love that fights for and defends me and has chosen me and he transformed me is also reaching for them in the same exact way. And so as much as I want to justify throwing rocks back and dehumanizing them back and humiliating them back, the love that I've found isn't doing any of those things and actually sees the Christ in me and them too. And that's like a really difficult thing that I don't have figured out, but I feel challenged and threatened by that. I feel at least like aware of it enough to feel convicted and bothered. And so there's an invitation, I think, for those of us in this space, whether you're a queer or you're an ally and doing this work, like what does it look like to have the courage to allow love to be as expansive and transformative as we've experienced in our own lives, to be that for them too, in us. That's it. I don't know what else to say about that, but it's there. How do people find me? If you want to see all the drama, Instagram's probably the best place. So my handle is @Maeshiro, my name. I have a podcast called Confessions of a Reformer. Josh has been on there, Stan's been on there a few times, so we've got great people coming on. I'm on Facebook, kind of. I'm on TikTok and Threads. I have a website, it's MikeMaeshiro.com. So I'm pretty easy. If you just know my first and last name, you can search me on all the things, and that's where I am. Thank you.
Mike Maeshiro, everybody.
Thank you.